Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this 4-episode series brought to you by the Liberty Fund, I'll be speaking with Aurélien Créchu, professor of political science at Indiana University, Bloomington. He's also an adjunct professor in the American Studies program and the Lilly Family School of Philanthropic Studies at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. We're here to talk about his latest book, which he edited and published with the Liberty Fund, a modern interpretation of Jacques Necker's 1792 work on executive power in great states. Necker, interestingly enough, was a Swiss statesman and banker appointed by King Louis XVI to be France's director of the Royal Treasury and later Director General of Finances. Necker's text is an examination of executive power and compares the French political system at the time with those of America and England, offering a robust defense of representative government. Necker's thesis was somewhat novel at the time, arriving well before other prominent political thinkers, such as Tocqueville, turned their sights on America's political landscape. Even so, Necker never managed to capture as much popular interest. This perhaps can be attributed to his moderate political views. Moderates, the thinking goes, don't stick out as much as their more radically leaning colleagues. Nevertheless, the book and Necker's ideas resonate in the context of today's contentious political environment. So we'll get into that and much more in this series, but in this first episode, Dr. Créchu and I set the stage with some historical background by way of an introduction to Jacques Necker himself. All right, Aurélien, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, you're welcome. So let's start with a little background here, or set the stage a little bit. So people know about the French Revolution through popularizations like Les Mis and from their European history classes in college. But those recollections may be a little dusty. So I wonder if you could kind of set the stage for us a bit. What was going on in France politically that led to the major upheavals at the end of the 18th century?
So the French Revolution is the outcome of a series of trends that have been at work in the history of Europe and in the history of France during the 18th century, following the Enlightenment and I would say during the Enlightenment. So we are talking about the aftermath of the Louis XIV reign, which ended in early 1700s. That led to an increase in financial debt and the consolidation of the royal power. The last time the States General, the so-called Parliament of France, so to speak, met was in 1615, and the kings have not called the representatives of the so-called Third Estate to assemble until 1789. So between 1615 and 1789, France basically did not have a stable parliament as we understand it today. It was an absolute monarchy, and as a result, the kings tended to ignore the demands of the Third Estate. Those demands made themselves more vocal and became more powerful as we progress through the 18th century. Public opinion acquires significance that had not had before. It didn't have before. And we reached the level of kind of revolutionary turmoil in 1780s, late 1780s, with an increase in financial debt. And of course, with the demand from the Third Estate, the bourgeoisie, if you wish, the small bourgeoisie, to gain political representation. So we have this, I would say, parallel rise of the public opinion on the one hand, a democratization of the public opinion, and a demand from below, from the Third Estate, that culminates in the moment of 1789. And that's what we call the French Revolution. It started officially in July of 1789, and it ended officially in July of 1794. But the roots of the French Revolution are deeper. So one could say that the revolution started earlier. And we shouldn't forget the importance of the American Revolution. We tend to today put a lot of emphasis on the French Revolution as the beginning of the modern age, so to speak. But the 18th century was an Atlantic phenomenon. when it comes to revolutions. The American Revolution fascinated the French scene, and the French were fascinated with America. Let's not forget that Lafayette fought along with General Washington. He became a national hero in the United States. He was revered in France as well. The French had this love affair with the American Revolution. So the example of the American Revolution must have had an impact in France as well. So all of these factors together, and there must have been others as well, have led to this moment of 1789 that we call the beginning of the French Revolution on July 14th with the fall of the Bastille.
Okay, excellent. That helps. So then into this background, let's introduce Jacques Necker. Who was he?
Well, Necker is an interesting figure because Necker was not French. Necker was born in Geneva, so he was a Swiss by today's standards. And he was a Protestant. So France is a Catholic country, and Necker came from a Protestant background, and he was not French. It's interesting that we know relatively little about the first half of Necker's, or the first third of Necker's life. Necker was a very rich man, and he did his apprenticeship in banking, in what we call today the financial sector. He started as an apprentice in an important bank, in which he rose to power, and he accumulated a huge wealth by the time he reached the age of 40. And he was appointed in 1776 in charge of the French royal finances. Now, let's step back for a moment and think about this. For a foreigner like Necker to become the person in charge of the French royal finances was something absolutely unheard of. A Protestant in charge of the finances of a Catholic country. But Necker had been recommended for this job by his success as a banker, as I said, and by his background. He was seen as an austere man, rather frugal, but very deft at financial speculations. We don't know exactly how he made his money, but it's almost certain that it was because of speculations with grains, which were very important in the 1760s, and Necker's bank was involved in that. So Necker took over the royal finances at a difficult time when the French debt was rising, and in 1781, he did something unheard of. He made public for the first time the budget of the Kingdom of France. The budget had been kind of a esoteric thing for the French. Nobody knew how the finances of the kingdom were organized or how the money was spent. And he made it public in 1781, in January of 1781. The account to the king became famous, caused a sensation and stirred controversy. And he was dismissed in May of 1781. And after that, he had the leisure to, think about the direction of the country and how the country ought to be run. He published an important book in 1784 called On the Administration of the Finances of France. And in this book, he made clear for the first time why public opinion has become a powerful political force. The rise of the public opinion, as I mentioned before, has been a steady phenomenon in the 18th century. But now public opinion was a political force, not only an intellectual force. And this idea was laid out in 1784 by Necker in this book. He published another important book in 1788 of the importance of religious opinions. And then he was recalled by the king in 1788 to take over the kingdom's finances again. And this is where I think Necker's political role became really important. From that moment in late 1788 to July of 1789, Necker was a first-rate political actor. he rose to the position of the second most important person in France after the king, which is remarkable again. And he presided over the opening of the Estates General, which were convoked by the king in May of 1789. After that, Necker was dismissed once again by the king, and it was his dismissal that basically triggered the fall of the Bastille in mid of July of 1789. The king recalled Necker. After that, he returned one more time, and he occupied a prominent position until September of 1790, when he withdrew from public life to his property in Coppet in Switzerland, where he died in 1804. So he was born in 1732. He passed away in 1804. He played an important political role in the politics of France. He was a banker. He was a very rich man, but he was also a political thinker. And I think this part of his career has been somewhat neglected by his posterity. Everyone knew of Necker during his lifetime as a rich man and as an ambitious man, but very few knew about Necker as a political thinker. Mm-hmm. And I think that it has taken a long time for his reputation as a political thinker to be consolidated. And this is what the publication of this book, I hope, will contribute to make Necker known as a first-rate political thinker. I should also add, perhaps, that the Necker family was a very interesting one. Necker was married to Suzanne Curchod, who was one of the most interesting salonières of 18th century France. Madame Necker, née Curchod, held a very interesting salon in Paris. And she was an Enlightenment figure, and she took great care of the education of their daughter, Germaine d'Estel, also known as Madame d'Estel, who became as famous as, if not more, than her parents, Suzanne Curchod and Jacques Necker. So this family, Jacques Necker, Suzanne Curchod, Suzanne Necker, and Germaine d'Estel, formed a kind of a trinity, very interesting family, all first-rate intellects, very interesting characters as well. And they lived in adoration of each other, so to speak. Both Madame Necker and Madame d'Estel created a cult of Jacques Necker during his lifetime and after he passed away. And people during their lifetime tended to mock this cult of personality of Necker. And it's interesting to put in parallel both the cult of Necker during his lifetime by the family, entertained by the family, and then the neglect of Necker posthumously.
You just heard from Aurélien Créchou, professor of political science at Indiana University Bloomington and editor of On Executive Power and Great States by Jacques Necker. This series is brought to you by the Liberty Fund. Join us next week when we continue our conversation and talk about Necker's moderate political views, which arguably caused his seminal text to be left behind as other more radical political thinkers entered the world stage.
And it showed a commitment to publicity, which is a very important concept. The idea that there are certain things that, in order to be legitimate, must be made public, and ways in which the money of the kingdom, the finances of the kingdom were organized, I think, was one such important political decision that he thought ought to be made public. The public ought to know. And I guess in that respect, he was very reformist. So those who would accuse him of being too conservative would lose sight of this reformist side. And those who would accuse him of being too reformist would certainly lose sight of his, I would say, more conservative side.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, drop me a line. I'm at bmickey@ala-choice.org. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's senior digital media producer, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.